You're listening to The Blueprint, brought to you by Executive Platforms. In every episode, we will discuss the topics and trends, the issues and ideas, the challenges and opportunities facing senior business leaders today. This series is one more way we want to engage with our network of industry executives. Thanks for joining us. Hello again, everyone. You're listening to another episode of Executive Platforms Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Christopher Shryock, the Chief People Officer of Sam's Club. In this role, he oversees all aspects of human resources for Sam's Club and is responsible for attracting, developing, rewarding, and retaining talent, as well as building a diverse and inclusive organization. Prior to Sam's Club, Christopher spent nearly 14 years at PepsiCo in a variety of global HR leadership roles in Plano, Texas, Geneva, Switzerland, Moscow, Russia, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and New York. Most recently, he was Senior Vice President of Human Resources for PepsiCo Food North America's commercial organization, where he led the HR agenda across the sales, marketing, and strategy and transformation organizations. Christopher earned a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Xavier University in Ohio and a Master of Arts in Industrial Organizational Psychology from Hofstra University. Christopher is going to be speaking at the upcoming North American HR Executive Summit, and he has generously agreed to share some of his thoughts and ideas with us today on the podcast. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Before we get too far into things, I want to give listeners a little more about you. When did you know you were going to spend your career focusing on human resources? And did you think in the early days that you would one day be a senior HR leader for an organization like Sam's Club?
I did not think that I would be a senior HR leader for an organization like Sam's Club. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was be a baseball player, but it turns out I couldn't hit a curveball, so HR became my backup plan. I think as far as when I knew I wanted to work in HR, that probably started when I went to grad school. As you mentioned, I went to Hofstra University for industrial organizational psychology, which to me was really just kind of a combination of psychology and business and statistics. And I started working for a small management consulting firm in Connecticut. And that was really the job that gave me an early view on different industries, CPG, pharma, banking. And it was really key that kind of helped me understand how industries are different, but great people, great managers, great leaders really can be kind of that common thread of success across certainly the companies that I worked with, which was really kind of what led me to knowing that helping companies have enough of the right type of talent and then helping individuals to build careers that they wanted and to be proud of. That seemed like a pretty good place to spend my time.
Absolutely. And I love that you immediately talked about leadership, because it does lead me into my next question.
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about how things have changed for HR professionals in senior leadership positions over the years. I believe most people like yourself who hold a C-suite position, they're acting more and more as strategic advisors and decision makers for the business as a whole than might have been true of chief human resources officers or chief people officers when you were first starting your career. What are your thoughts about that evolution?
So, look, I've been doing this for 20 years, and there's a lot of it that has changed. I mean, I remember when I took my first job with a company in New Jersey, and I remember calling my dad to tell him I took a job in HR, and I remember him saying to me, "Why do you want to run payroll and execute processes?" Right? And I think he was looking at it more even from like a 1980s, 1990s type of lens. And I tried to explain that's not exactly what it is. And I think, that the evolution of that though now, I mean, I look at HR and I think about, how you develop, how you identify, how you manage, how you reward talent, responsibility for change, culture, all of that. If I think about CHRO jobs or just large senior HR jobs in general, I mean, you go back 15, 20 years and I remember from my time at PepsiCo, we used to, the model for HR or for senior HR positions was, we called it the Wizard of Oz model, which is basically, do you have a heart? Do you have a brain? Do you have courage? These are the three things that you need, right? If I think about the job today, you still need the Wizard of Oz model. But I think beyond that, number one, if you're a CHRO, your first job is to be a member of the C-suite or a member of the leadership team. I think your second job is being a part of the development of the actual business strategy. And then the third part of the job becomes, how do you actually build out an HR agenda and strategy that's going to support that? So again, while I think that brain and courage and heart are still needed, if you're a CHRO, you're the head of human capital. So you think about succession planning and executive boards and how you keep the culture. You're the head of talent strategy. So ensuring you've got enough of the right type of talent to execute that business strategy, if that's your value proposition or how you identify and assess and develop talent. I think you're responsible for really leading and sustaining change in an organization. So how you challenge the status quo, how you advocate for associates and kind of integrate various stakeholders together. I mean, I spend a lot of my time trying to get two people that are both talking to me to talk to each other, right? That's a really, really important part of that role. And then, of course, you get kind of the privileged position because you see so many different things across the company of really being if not the kind of key advisor to the CEO, to the team, and the key talent in the organization. So I think we've come a long way from payroll and processes and requirements of courage and heart and brain to something that's a lot broader and I would say more impactful today in many, if not most companies.
Absolutely. And the idea of change is something that I want to explore a little bit more. Obviously, change is inevitable. Usually, it's more of a gradual process, and dramatic transformation is rare. But I think the pandemic is going to be remembered as a dividing line of before and after for many HR professionals. Sam's Club, of course, was serving the public all through the COVID-19 crisis. Could you talk to us about some of the HR challenges your workforce was facing as a retailer during that time? And I'd also be interested in hearing maybe some of the solutions and innovations you may have come up with during the crisis that have survived and evolved up to the present as good ideas to hold on to on the far side of the pandemic.
Yeah. Your comment up front about, change being a gradual process. There's there's this old book I like, an old Hemingway book called The Sun Also Rises. And there's a great line in there where one character says to the other, "How did you go broke?" And the second character answers, "Gradually and then suddenly." And I think there's a lot of that, both from a business and an HR side that we saw during and post the pandemic. So for me, for example, I might say, if I just talk about the business side for a minute, leading into the pandemic, we talked a lot about, wouldn't it be great if, and we're doing work to enable this concept of curbside pickup. So order something online, go pick it up. Well, then the pandemic hit and that gradual became sudden. And, there was a curbside pickup business that was set up basically in 6 days. Very similar, I would say, when it comes to a lot of the tools that associates were using. So we'd been working for years to get associates the right tools so that they could seamlessly do their job. So we had things already like Ask Sam, which is basically, it's like a Siri assistant. So if you're an associate in a club, where do I find product X? Are we in stock, out of stock, et cetera? But we've got a lot more than that now. So for example, if you're in a Sam's Club today, you will see this floor scrubber that is ostensibly cleaning the floors of the club. And it is cleaning the floors, but what it's also really doing is it's taking photos of all of our inventory. So that if you're an associate, when you need to bring a pallet out of the steel and put it on the floor. When an item is misplaced, when a price sign is wrong, when there may be a safety hazard in an aisle. So like really ramping up those associate tools. And, I also think a little bit about, prior to the pandemic, we'd been kind of casually working with high school students as interns just to get them a little bit of experience kind of in their pocket. But I think COVID really, really heightened the competition in terms of job applicants. So this high school internship was a place we've been gradually moving through, but became a really big idea for us. So we'd set this program that was kind of a 10-week program for juniors and seniors. They got a preview of all the different jobs. We taught a lot of skills in terms of not just how to work inside of a Sam's Club, but financial planning, et cetera. We had parents involved, guidance counselors involved. And that for us has been a really, really good lifeline in terms of really great talent. I mean, we went from, I think, 70 interns that first year to now we've had about 700, and 70% of them have kind of stayed and become actual associates for us. And there was, I'm in clubs a fair amount, and there was a woman in Minnesota that I think is a really good synopsis of kind of this tech piece and this internship piece. So she interned with us for 10 weeks. She decided she wanted to stay. So we hired her full-time, working kind of the front end of the club. A lot of those tools and resources allowed her to onboard pretty quickly into that role. She became a team lead, and now she's the first salaried manager of those high school interns. So she went from someone that was a junior in high school 3 years ago to making $65,000 as a salaried manager, also paid college tuition. And a lot of that happened because we had that intern program that was born out of COVID, because we have a lot better technology and tools and resources for people to be able to do their jobs that were born through COVID. So we've got a lot of, I think, those really good examples of where we were dabbling, but we really got serious, really leaned in. And I think we've seen some pretty tangible impact as a result of that.
I love that example. I would like to explore a little further the idea of the specifics of talent attraction, development, and retention. Just about every company I speak to across every industry and vertical says things have changed. And, I'd be curious, how are you adjusting your organization to continue to appeal to current and future employees?
I think it was true with the high school intern program, and I think it's true now in terms of those current and future employees. So, we know who we are. Part of that is kind of the values of the company, of how you act with integrity and this striving for excellence and serving the member and respecting the individual. But I think more of that is, we know we are a company and a culture it's really connected. That ability to collaborate, to coordinate, really important. We know we're a company that kind of rewards that career growth piece. So if it's the example of Diana or so many others, I mean, you've got 75% of the folks that are salaried managers today, they started as hourly associates for us. I think we're a really creative and a really curious company as well. So that goes back a little bit to kind of that, I use that inventory scrubber as a really good example of, wouldn't it be cool if we knew when to take something out of the steel and put it on the ground, and is now turned into automating so much work that frees associates up to do the things they're great at, which is working and interacting with members. And I think we're a company that's pretty confident. I mean, you go back through COVID and the years following that, I think we had 12 straight quarters of double-digit growth. We're opening new clubs. So there's this, we know kind of who we are.
Now, not every organization has the scale of a Sam's Club. If there is a piece of advice you could offer to the chief people officer or equivalent job title of someone working for a smaller organization who is also looking to stay on top of today's changing business landscape, what would you suggest?
The first thing I would say is just know what's going on in the world. What I found in this job and others is, world events they're not abstractions. They impact how people feel that work for you. They impact how people feel that shop for you. And I think they go a long way to informing kind of opportunities and innovation that you have. So you've got to understand and play a role in kind of that broader society. And to do that, you've got to know what's going on. So knowing what's going on in the world, I think, is important. I think the second is knowing the business and knowing the people. You've got to spend time both understanding and then influencing what the business strategy and what the initiatives are, the thinking behind it, and how that ecosystem connects. Spending time in the market, whatever that might mean for you or your business, but seeing how your business comes to life, what works, what doesn't, how it impacts associates. You've got to talk to people. I guess you can do a job like mine from behind a desk in corporate, but I don't think you can do it very well. I think look at some data, sure, but don't forget to meet people for lunch, for coffee, et cetera, and kind of what you learn. I think you'd be kind of amazed by. And then I think the third thing I would say is, don't try to do everything, and don't spend a lot of time tinkering with things that are working and might not really be important to people outside of HR. I mean, my grandfather was a jeweler, and he spent a lot of his time making watches. And he would always say, when he was talking about fixing watches, of, if it's ticking, don't open the back. And I think that's a mistake that I've seen a lot of people make, is they tinker with things that don't matter. And they've got, a 14-point HR agenda that requires 40 pages to explain, and nobody knows what they're talking about, right? So to me, if it takes you more than 2 minutes to articulate what you're focusing on in terms of an HR agenda, you're probably doing it wrong. Look at the strategy of the business, look at some data, pick a few things, focus on them, drive them, measure them, and then you can come back next year and make it even better.
Absolutely. So Having asked a question for smaller organizations, I guess the next logical place to go is to talk about HR across a large organization. So, Sam's
Yeah.
Club has something like 600 membership warehouses, 600 membership warehouse clubs across 44 states and Puerto Rico. I understand Walmart International also operates Sam's Club stores in Mexico and China. A footprint that large and a workforce that broad and diverse must come with so many challenges that other large organizations can also relate to. What advice would you have for your peers working as chief people officers in other large organizations?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think that it is a lot different from kind of the advice for smaller organizations. I mean, I hear that a lot kind of in my role of, for a company that's as large as Sam's or as large as Walmart's, you must have to do so many things different. And the answer is you do, but I also kind of have this belief of once you have more than, I don't know, 20, 30,000 people, at some point you're just big. And the challenges that we might have from a Sam's Club or a Walmart point of view are not that different, I would say, than the challenges of a company with kind of 20, 30,000 employees that might make a few $1 billion in revenue. So I try to always boil just things back to the basics of know the external context, know your business, know your people, work to influence it, and focus on the few things that will make the largest impact. I don't draw a large distinction between how to do HR in smaller or more startup orgs with how to do it in large orgs. The scale will be different, the focus will be different, the business will be different, the people will be different, but a lot of those components from a process point of view, I find to be pretty similar.
When you look ahead at future trends in the business landscape and within HR in particular, what gets you excited?
I've I've described myself as kind of a reformed pessimist or cynic, and have kind of found myself moving much more to kind of the optimistic view. So I think there's a lot of things that are working in the favor of not just HR, but just kind of the labor environment in general. So I look around and I think, okay, so we've got unemployment is sitting at 3.8, 3.9%. I mean, effectively a 60-year low. The number of women that are in the workforce between the ages of 25 and 54 has never been higher since the pandemic. So since 2020, inflation adjusted wages have grown so much for most workers that it's wiped out 25% of the last 40 years income inequality. And the US specifically, it's growing faster than any other G7 country. So I just look at the business landscape, the labor landscape, and I see a lot of positive things out there that I think we can really lean into. I also think there's some pretty big issues that as a function, we're going to have to help the business really work to face into. So I think one of those is around artificial intelligence or probably generative AI more specifically. I mean, ChatGPT launched basically 12 months ago, almost to the day. I think that is going to, over time, have an outsized impact on labor, on work, and on organizations. And more specifically, if you kind of look at something like ChatGPT, I mean, really all these generative AI models basically do is two things. They remember and they predict. Machines are really good at predictions, but humans are really good at judgment and making decisions based on those predictions. And I think you need both. So I look at the role of AI as not necessarily to automate, but to augment the work that people do. I don't see it as driving labor out. I see it as driving capability up. So if I look at our own business, we do a lot of work in terms of digital products and people shop for Sam's Club on our app. So I don't think the people that are designing our app are going to be replaced by AI. I think they're going to be replaced by app designers that are using AI. And that's a really, really important distinction. So for me, I think the role of HR is to help people understand how AI can help them and how it can augment their work. If that's summarizing research, brainstorming, coming up with draft correspondence, marketing campaigns, app designs, et cetera. And I think it's also helping organizations to decide how to use it, because I think every organization is going to get to make they're going to get to make three choices. They can reduce their headcount. I wouldn't do that. They can get exponential productivity done before or done today as before, or they can reallocate some resources to other parts of the company. So I think there's a big role for HR to play in terms of how we make this mainstream. I think there's a second piece in terms of just fairness, equity, inclusion, et cetera. It's really easy to be critical of where companies are from a DE&I point of view, but I think that companies will have made more progress on DE&I in the next 5 years than probably in the past 10 years. And I think a lot of that is due to demography. Just the people that are entering the workforce are so much more diverse than they've ever been. It's especially true of women. I mean, women are they're 60% of college students, they're 70% of valedictorians, and you have a younger generation that is just way more liberal and has much higher expectations of corporations. So I think this fairness, equity, inclusion piece, this is going to be a big one for us to get ahead of. And I think there's a final component of just talent mobility. I think it was Gardner that had published a study earlier in the year that talked about, I think it was like 1.6 or 1.7% of people that were willing to relocate for work in the US. So the impact for us as HR is, how do we think about enabling asynchronous hybrid working models, which is going to be really important if you want the best talent, because unlike 10, 15, 20 years ago, most people are not packing up and selling their homes, especially not with 8% interest rate. So how we think very differently about access to and encouraging the mobility for the best talent, that's another one that I think is going to be very important moving forward.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation, and you've already been so generous with your time and ideas. Just before I let you go, I want to ask a question I put to everyone who does one of these longer format interviews with me. Now, you're a leader and you have a team and an organization that look to you for guidance and support. I'd like you to talk about someone who shaped who you are and how you lead. You don't need to name any names if you would prefer not to, of course, but what is the biggest takeaway you gained from your time with that person that you can share with our listeners?
So I go all the way back to probably 20 years ago when I'd first started, and I'd mentioned working at this management consulting firm in Connecticut, and I probably was 23 or 24 years old, and I remember the principal owner of that firm played an enormous role in kind of shaping who I am, and probably one of the biggest lessons I took away from working there. I remember I was working through this proposal for a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey, and this woman had said, "Hey, here's how I think we need to lay this out." So I'm 23 or 24, and I just diligently did pretty much exactly what she asked. I got to the end of the proposal and thought, this seems too complicated. It really doesn't make any sense. I'm not sure what they're going to do with this, but okay, that's what she said to do. So that's what I did. And I remember the next day I went into the office and she said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" I said, "Sure." And the essence of what she said, which I've never forgotten, was basically, what is this proposal? This doesn't make any sense. There's no clear action. There is no clear outcome that we are driving for. And I said, "Yeah, I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I just wrote down what you said." And she said, "Christopher, I don't pay you to follow instructions. I pay you to think." And I never forgot that. And I think aside from the obvious lessons of critical thinking and problem solving and communication, there was a lot that role and a lot that individual to this day kind of continues to shape me on in terms of, what are the outcomes you want and how do you work backwards? What's something that's an interesting insight versus an actionable one? And probably most importantly was knowing when to have the courage to speak up. And I think that's especially important in my job now. I don't have a lot of really easy issues that land on my desk. By the time it gets to my desk, all the obvious stuff has been done. And a lot of times, if I'm not the one to lean into those things and say what I think is right for associates, to say what I think is true, I find that no one does. And a lot of those lessons I got from that very first job at this consulting firm in Connecticut.
What a fantastic note to end things on. I think that can apply to just about everybody, no matter what they do for a living. The idea of, you're paid to think, and actually that is the value that you bring to it. And it's also what you're going to take the most satisfaction out of doing. You don't want to follow dictated orders. You want to come up with something that you're happy with in the end. So thank you so much for that, Christopher.
And of course, I mean, I think everybody wants to go home at night and talk about what they've done, what they've created, not the instructions that they followed. So there's a real element and emphasis on that.
I feel like we could be having a conversation all day, but I do want to be both respectful of your time and let you save something for your presentation at the North American HR Executive Summit. Really looking forward to seeing that. Thank you again for joining our speaker faculty.
Thanks very much thanks for the invitation to do this. And I'm looking forward to the summit next week, Jeff.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for everyone who is listening to this, stay tuned for hopefully updates from the event. And thank you again so much, Christopher, for joining us. Everyone who's been listening, this has been an episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint Podcast. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.